Let's move on, though, into the next team, and these are previews, Sean, where we just keep going. They just keep going. Like, this is where we get the podcasting chops, where we really test out our stamina for recording, because you really got to have that long stamina to go, especially when we add a Matt Patreon segment at the beginning of them, going 8 segments deep on the podcast.
Thanks for missing, Brandon. Appreciate it.
Well, it's not just that. Both you and I had a 3-hour podcast on Saturday that we recorded, and now we got one of these. The next team we're diving into is the Florida Gators. This is a team last year didn't do so hot. And the reason why I say it like that is, like I said to you while we were fixing the camera and stuff, I go, this team was surprisingly bad this year. Didn't expect them to be like that. Where you look at 2 years ago, it was your top 3 teams. It's like, oh, who's going to win the SEC as well? Could be Florida, could be Tennessee, could be Georgia. Not the case last year. Obviously, Georgia ran away with it. But Florida, the big thing they got going for them this year is they get their guy. They get the new hire coming out of Mississippi State, an SEC guy. They get Dan Mullen, who's going to be he was Florida's offensive coordinator during the 2 national championships they won under Urban Meyer. And this is what a little quote from Dan Mullen, I believe. He says, "I know how important offense is here. I know everybody likes to score some points. I love scoring points." So for me, I'm going to ask you, what does Dan Mullen's hire mean for Florida, and will that translate into more points this year for the Gators?
Well, I think Gator fans have to hope it will, but I think the biggest thing that Dan Mullen being hired means for the Gators is just another regime change, another guy you have to look at and just wait and see, because he isn't an Urban Meyer. He isn't a guy that's going to step in like the good old ball coach and Steve Spurrier. You're going to have to wait. Has he had success before? Yes, he's had 10-win seasons. He's had a 9-win season. He's gone to a bowl with his team ever since 2010. But we look at all these teams, and outside that 10-win season in 2014, there have been like the Gator Bowl, the Music City Bowl, the Belk Bowl, the St. Peter's Bowl, the Tax Slayer Bowl. He's not going to big-name bowls. Now that he's at a bigger-name program in Florida, that can change because you're going to get better recruits. You're going to be in the state of Florida, which consistently,
to go to better bowls.
Which consistently creates better players and better recruits. So I think it's the biggest thing is that you're going to have another regime change, and you're going to be bringing in a guy who's had success before in the SEC. Does it mean it's going to translate into a better offense? Does it mean it's going to translate into a better team on the field year one? It might not, just because, again, you have the stench of McElwain still on that program. You still have the stench of Muschamp on that program. You need to rebuild, retool, strip it down, and build up. Are there still talented players in this team? 100%. That defense looks absolutely great. But offensively, I don't know what they're going to be doing. And the first question is at quarterback.
The biggest, and that was where I was going to go, the biggest problem with this team is that they haven't had a quarterback throw for more than 16 touchdowns since 2009. Since they had a Mr. Tim Tebow as their starting quarterback, they have not had a quarterback throw for more than 16 touchdowns. That's not good. That is not good. And when you've got a guy like Felipe Franks, who many are thinking is going to be the guy to be the starter for Dan Mullen, it could also be Kyle Trask. I'll get to him in a second. But with Franks, the bad with him, 8 interceptions last year. How many touchdowns did he have? Oh, only 9, so it wasn't that much better. Just over 1-to-1 touchdown to INT ratio. He was also sacked 29 times. And I know some people will come in. I'll give a little credit to those sacks for the offensive line because they're not all on the quarterback. Some of those are on the offensive line. But the question is, what do you go with? Do you go with the guy in Felipe Franks who at least has experience as the starter? I know last year it was all, should it be him? Should it be Malik Zaire after Luke Del Rio went down with his injury? I think it was a shoulder injury. Now it becomes, do you go with Felipe Franks who has that experience, or do you go with the redshirt sophomore, I almost said freshman, sophomore in Kyle Trask, who some are saying is the better pure passer, and also the thing that kind of plays into this is there was supposed to be another guy in this, a Matt Corral, but he said, adios, I ain't coming here. I'm going to go somewhere else. And he transferred, I think it was to Ole Miss is where he's at now. So right now they believe they're with Franks or they're with Trask. With me, I don't know why if you're not Dan Mullen. It depends on how they play, like in spring ball and over the summer. But if Trask shows you something, you're a new coach coming in, I would say I might take the risk and fly with the redshirt sophomore over Felipe Franks.
I'm on the complete opposite side. And it's the same reason I gave during the Tennessee preview is that I want a guy in a new program. Yes, Dan Mullen's been in Florida before, but at a new program, at least to start the season, I want a guy with experience in there. I don't want a guy that's going to be, rushing decision-making, hasn't been playing in a college game before in his career, and you're looking, the offense is looking at him as, all right, call the shots, be a leader. Franks, he might not be a great leader. I don't know because I don't know the kid personally, but if he has the experience, I think that's the biggest thing that's going to play into Frank's battle for the quarterback is that he has experience at Florida. He has experience with these guys before, and he's been in the locker room and consistently been on the field with them. Where, yes, again, the redshirt sophomore has been in the program, but he hasn't been on the field with them. So I think the biggest thing with Franks is that he has the experience, and I think Dan Mullen might look at that to at least rely on because, hey, you've been here before. You've played in Florida before. You've been in the Swamp. You played in the Swamp before. You know what it's like.
Gainesville.
Come in here and at least lead our team in the first couple games. Again, maybe talent will win out, and if he's that much talented than Franks, then I think he's going to end up winning out because Dan Mullen is a very strong head coach with a great background. I think that his guys are at least going to be able to respect that and stick with him and believe in him. And I don't think you really need the experience too much. But if it comes down to, all right, these guys are, the same player or at least, very similar, it's not too much of an edge, I think Frank's experience might give him that edge and make him the starting quarterback, at least to start for the Florida Gators.
It's going to be a tough decision. I'm just throwing out there that it depends on all what we see. Obviously, if Trask comes out and it's like, oh, this guy shouldn't be starting, of course, go at Franks. The thing that I wonder, though...
But that's the thing. That's the thing. I don't want to get rid of... Like, the guy that's been there for me, Franks. He's been there. I don't want to pull the carpet out from underneath him and throw him in. It's the same shit that happened with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and Malik Zaire and Deshaun Kaiser.
And then
Kaiser was there,
transferring.
yanked Kaiser, and then they put in... No, it wasn't... Zaire was upset that he didn't play enough, but Kaiser was more experienced. He was the better quarterback, but Brian Kelly didn't like Kaiser's attitude. So he yanked Kaiser out and threw in Zaire.
That was the season where Kaiser had that game-winning pass against Virginia, right?
No, it was Texas.
Okay.
It was absolute bullshit. It was so stupid. It was the year before. It was not last year, but the year before.
Yeah.
And Kaiser was having a great game against Texas, and they kept putting in Zaire. They kept putting in Zaire, and the team was just looking terrible. The whole point that I'm trying to get, though, is Kaiser was there. Kaiser was performing, and you don't want to at least hurt Franks' confidence. You don't want to even break his trust that his teammates might have in him and throw in a sophomore just for Franks to come back in. I think stick with the guy that has the experience, and it's a lot of pressure to throw on a redshirt sophomore.
Here's ultimately how I feel like their quarterback situation will play out. Is I feel like Franks will be the starter. He'll be the one that is pegged that. So he'll be the sophomore starter this year. Then next year, they'll hopefully, knock on wood, no answered moms or dads kind of keep the letter of intent from getting faxed over to Florida. They're banking on the guy who committed in April, this was after Mullen got hired. He got hired in November. Jalen Jones committed to Florida. He's a quarterback, dual threat quarterback out of the Baltimore area. I think what'll happen is if, knock on wood, he comes in, the plan is this is a Mullen guy. Frank starts this year. Franks even starts next year in his junior year. And then hopefully after junior year, either after junior year, if Frank says, you know what, I'm going to go to the NFL draft for some reason, or if he does play his senior year, you feel it out that way. If Franks leaves after his junior year, all right, Jalen Jones is now the guy in his sophomore year to take over. Or if Franks plays in his senior year, all right, we're just going to have Jalen Jones come on up as a starting junior and kind of starting that trend of like, all right, we're going to have juniors and seniors starting in this quarterback role, or redshirt sophomores if they're like a Jameis Winston level like talent.
Well, and one thing too, going back to Mullen's quote about offense and finding the quarterback down the road, the future I think is bright for Florida. I'm not departing that, but you look at what Mullen has done and Mullen did at Mississippi State. 2009 hit the 73rd best offense in the NCAA. Then in 2010, 51st best offense in the NCAA. 73rd best offense in the NCAA. Next year, 60th best offense in the NCAA. 71st best offense in the NCAA. It wasn't until that 2014 season where he had the 15th best offense that scored over 30 points per game, and then consistently from 2014 to his last year at Mississippi State, he's been able to get 30 points per game throughout the season. So I think one thing is, yes, you can come in and be confident, because I think he should be, because he's been there before at Florida, and he's had a pretty decent resume at Mississippi State. But saying, I know how important offense is here, I like to score some points, if you're going out there and just throwing up another 26 points per game, I think this might look bad on Mullen. I just feel like Florida fans might temper their expectations for this offense, because there isn't a solid guy that we believe in at quarterback, and it sounds like everybody else who's covering the Florida Gators isn't really sold on a quarterback. Now, that might change from our fans, and I know the Florida Gator fans will let us know, but I think you got to temper your expectations if you are the Florida Gator fans, because Dan Mullen will be able to put out a great culture, a great system. He knows this Florida program before, but it's going to take a while for him to get that implemented. Does that mean this team could be a top 25 team this year? Possibly. They might end up in the top 25, but I don't think this team is going to be near the top of the SEC. It's SEC East. Maybe they're third in the SEC East, maybe even second, but I don't think this is a team that's going to be able to put up a ton of points this year with the quarterback situation and kind of the questions they do have on offense.
Well, and the one thing I am looking at right now is the thing that's going to help you score points, especially when we're talking about the quarterback situation, is your wide receivers. And the big name that everyone probably knows about that's no longer there, Antonio Callaway. He's not going to be with the Florida Gators. Right now, you look at it, they've got guys like Tyree Cleveland and guys like Kadarius Toney injury prone. What are we going to get out of them? To me, the big two names that they are Florida banking on this season, and with the recent rule that the SEC passed during their media days, where the league had approved a rule change that grants eligibility for student athletes who graduate or transfer within the conference, according to multiple reports. This means that guys like from Ole Miss, you have Van Jefferson, and then from Ohio State, you got Trayvon Grimes. These are two guys that, with this rule change, might be able to play immediately, not have to sit out this season. So for me, once you figure out that quarterback question, let's say for the sake of argument, the answer is Franks, then it becomes, what are we doing at wide receiver, and how are we going to use those wide receivers to make our quarterback better and make it to where Franks maybe has 16 touchdowns this year.
I mean, it may, but 16 touchdowns, like, who cares? Like,
I'm just saying. Like, it's bad when Tim Tebow, who I know NFL college,
I don't think the guy that is currently on. I don't think there's a guy on the roster that is the next Tim Tebow. I don't think there's a guy that's the next Chris Leak. Even I don't think the next guy is the next Cam Newton, who's on the Florida program. I think it's going to be a while until Dan Mullen's able to get this program underneath. And yes, whether those if the transfers come over, it's going to help. Good old Franks. But I don't know if it's going to be the thing that turns him in from a guy who's a first year starter to a guy that's going to lead them to a successful 10-win season. I think the biggest thing is just finding a balance and being able to sure this culture gets set up in Florida and being sure you can get some big wins. You don't have to beat the best of the best, but if you're able to at least be competitive, especially in that Florida-Georgia game, I think that's going to be a good sign for Dan Mullen's program. And then you also look at what they're bringing in on the defensive side and Tom Gratham. There's a very deep amount of talent on this Florida defense. They underperformed last year, and Florida's typically known for their defense. I know, obviously offense has been a big thing, especially when they were winning national championships, but their defense consistently has been good. They've been consistently turning out NFL prospects. And I think that's a big thing, is bringing in a guy that's been in the SEC, not only with Dan Mullen before at Mississippi State, but also being at Georgia before. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what Grantham can do with this defense, because there's a lot of talent on it.
I was going to ask you about him, because basically what I see with him is he's one of the, I don't know all the situations in college football, but he has to be one of the luckiest new coordinators in college football this year, because it's like, great, I get to land this job and I get to work with these players. Sweet, this is gonna be easy with what I can do. It's kind of like, I'm gonna relate it to like a teacher coming out of college. You go to one school and it's like, great, I got no resources. What I'm gonna do? This is like he's going to that high-end school where it's like, what? I've got technology. I've got endless possibilities. Let's go. Let's do this.
Well, and especially for home games, I mean, he's going to have a swamp on his side. So I think that's the big thing is if Mullen's able to get up crowd support, Grantham's job is going to be even easier. So having guys, especially on the outside, the secondary looks fantastic. They have guys in the middle as well. Finally had a 100-plus tackler last year. I think they're going to be able to, especially bringing him back, they're going to have a guy in the middle that's going to be successful. I think the biggest thing is just making sure, again, your culture is established, and if fan support's behind them, this talent's going to be able to shine because that pressure is going to be off them. And then going away, you always have that mindset of, hey, we're going to be back at the swamp at some point, but also we have that fan support at home, and being able to push that into a defense, feed the defense, it's absolutely massive. And that's the one reason why Florida's been consistently great defensively is because of their fans, because of that atmosphere of the swamp. You're consistently going into a hot, muggy place, and you're getting screamed at by 100,000 Florida Gator fans. So Grantham not only has it easy because of the talent on him, but he also has the success, the benefit of the program that he's going to. So I think it's massive, and it's going to be such an easy job for Grantham. So that's one thing is we're saying it's going to be an easy job. If this defense sucks, you're going to look right at Grantham because you have the talent,
like you
have the program, you have the stadium, you have the fans. Unless there's injuries, you're going to look at them and be like, all right, you're a fucking problem. So I think that's one thing with the Gators.
Last thing I'll ask is the schedule, because for me, I look at it, maybe this is me going back a year or two and thinking of that Florida team and kind of my, I don't want to say bias, but what I've been used to with Florida being at the top of the division. I look at this schedule and I go, except for maybe the Mississippi State, LSU, Georgia game, very winnable games on the schedule.
I agree.
I like all the non-conference, Colorado State, Charleston Southern,
Florida State,
Idaho. Florida State's interesting to me because
it's at Florida State.
Well, that plus it's at the end of the year. It'll be a Thanksgiving weekend game. Like Willie Taggart, what is he going to do in year one? And also what Brandon and I talked about, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. Yeah, 2 weeks ago, with the whole Francois Blackman situation. Who's going to start at quarterback? How's that going to play out in itself? It's more winnable than it used to be, is what I'm leaning towards in that one. And then SEC, like I said, Mississippi State. Yeah, I'm throwing it in there, but you'll probably win that one.
Well, and that's one thing, too, is Mullen wants to win that one because he's going back.
And he's going back, and it's at home. It's at home
it's at
Mississippi State.
Yeah.
So then really it's LSU and Georgia. Those are the two question marks in the Georgia game, neutral site game.
Well, I don't think even the LSU one's going to be a winnable game because it's at the swamp. So
true, and they've got questions at quarterback.
I think the schedule, and Geis is gone, Fournette's gone. I mean, they don't have the same, and Chark's gone.
Leonard Fournette's gone. They got his little brother, Leonard.
Oh, my bad.
Leonard and Leonard.
But no, the good Fournette is gone. Chark's gone. Geis is gone. I mean, they lost a lot of playmakers. I'm not a big fan of Ed Orgeron. So I think that LSU game could be massively winnable. So, I mean, looking at this Florida team, they might not have a great offense. They have talent on that defense, but it's got to come together. But even then, I still look at this Florida team. I think they can be a top 25 team again. Teams are going to be, games are going to be difficult. I mean, even Kentucky, even though they're not a great team, they might, come in early, especially coming off a pretty decent season for Kentucky. Punch them in the mouth, especially when they're Florida isn't really settled as a team, not really used with playing with under Dan Mullen. Same can go with the Tennessee game. That's at Tennessee. That's going to be one of the biggest games for Jeremy Pruitt. If Jeremy Pruitt gets his guys fired up, that could be something that flips. So
or like
I think
at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, no, actually, no, I don't believe that. But
I'm just saying, like being on the road at Vanderbilt, like that could be
going up against Vanderbilt. You should be a 10-point favorite.
I'm saying. I expect Florida to win that one, but I look at that Vanderbilt game and I go, you know what? Maybe it's just the back of my head. A lapse of judgment game for Florida. Vanderbilt wins, and and then Vanderbilt fans come back to this video and go, "Look at that! You doubted us. Look at what happened."
I'd give it to you if the Georgia game was the next week,
Like
but they have
looking
they have
ahead.
a bye. So that's the thing is they're not looking forward to Georgia. They're not getting amped up for Georgia. They're getting amped up for their bye.
Yeah.
So they're going to be able to put
get ready for Georgia.
Yeah, they're going to put everything they have into that game for Vanderbilt to make sure they go into that Georgia game with enough momentum. Especially if they come off against a loss against LSU. I think Vanderbilt's just like a sit and duck there. I mean, they're sit and duck with a guy with a shotgun who's 5 feet away from him. So yeah, I think
Poor Commodore fans.
I think Vanderbilt gets exploded on that one. But yeah, I think Florida's going to have a pretty successful season.
Yeah, this one should be almost a complete 180 for Florida back in the right direction. It's the perfect kind of, yes, there's questions on offense, but the defense should help carry this team. Plus the schedule. It would be different if it's like instead of...
You have Bama, you have Auburn.
Instead of like
Vanderbilt,
of Mississippi State and LSU, if you were to play at Bama and then home against Auburn, completely different story. Completely different story. You're probably losing those two and to Georgia because really I would give Georgia the favorite right now just because of what we've seen last year. But this is where I want to turn the question on to you guys. What do you think down below in the comment section? What do you expect from this offense? Who's going to be the starting quarterback? What do you expect from the offense to help out either quarterback that is starting? What do you think about the defense, and what do you think this team does this year in the SEC East? Let us know what you guys think down below in that comment section.